Hello, everyone. I am in a coffee shop trying to record this on Wi-Fi because I have not had my Wi-Fi installed yet at my new cottage. So I am endeavoring to bring you a new moon forecast for the Taurus new moon coming up this week on the 19th of May, which I think is Friday. So this is the chart for the new moon. Let me just make it a little bit bigger so you can see. And remembering that our last new moon and full moon were eclipses. So Taurus has been an eclipsing sign for the last little while. And this is the first time we've got one more Taurus eclipse that will be in late October, I think it is. And then we're out of the Taurus Scorpio eclipse axis. The node you can see here is still in Taurus, but only for a little while longer. It's at 2 degrees. And the nodes go backwards, so it's nearly getting out of Taurus. And conversely, Scorpio, where it is, the south node is in Scorpio, the north node is in Taurus. So we are moving into our last new moon, which was Aries. We are moving into that Aries Libra axis. So this is a new moon that the previous Taurus lunation was an eclipse. The next Taurus lunation, that full moon in late October, is going to be an eclipse. But this little one here in the middle is not an eclipse. And that in itself is quite interesting because it's almost like there's an energy that's kind of coming off the boil, but it's like the eye of the storm. If we think of those eclipses as supercharged, supersized lunations, and we have this one now that is not quite an eclipse, but we had an eclipse 2 weeks prior, and we had an old Taurus eclipse and a next Taurus eclipse coming next Taurus lunation. I hope this is making sense to you. I'm trying not to be distracted by the sound of the generator, etc., going on here. Basically, this is an opportunity for us to kind of let some of the big Taurus stuff settle, saying that there is big Taurus stuff happening in this particular lunation as well. Because you may remember that Mercury has just done a retrograde process. So here's Mercury also in Taurus and has literally in the same week as this new moon has just gone direct. So Mercury is no longer retrograde, but he is in the shadow and he's only a few degrees off where he was at the full moon. So I'm just going to jump back to that chart for a second. Okay, here's Scorpio full moon. Mercury was at 8 degrees. Now Mercury is at 6 degrees. So he's heading back towards the place he was at the last eclipse. It's right there in that same space, which means that a lot of what we have been thinking about and rehashing that maybe was exacerbated through those last 2 eclipses, so for the last 4 weeks, is sort of starting to settle. And I think of Taurus sometimes as the laying down of sediment. And so you can almost think like all that stuff that's been pulled up by the wind or stirred up in the waters is beginning to settle. And we're beginning to get a stronger, more concrete idea of all the stuff that's been irritating, because remember, Mercury is our thinking. So why have I been continually thinking about that recently? Or why has that always been my story? And I don't understand how to turn it around. All of those types of things that have been stirring and swirling are having an opportunity to start to settle. We're getting a bit of a picture of how to move forward potentially. Sorry, it's actually quite chilly here. So I'm wrapped up. So that's an interesting part of this. And Mercury is, because of a retrograde, has had a little longer than usual in Taurus. And Mercury in Taurus is also like slower moving anyway. So moving backwards in a slower moving sign, Mercury likes to move fast. Mercury likes to be puzzling things out at warp speed and hasn't had that opportunity, which has been already uncomfortable. Mercury can be a bit frustrated in Taurus at the best of times, let alone with a retrograde and around the eclipse season. And he's making his way towards Uranus, which will still be a little while, but that's going to also be like all that Uranus has been doing in Taurus in the last few years, shaking up the foundations. I spoke to this in my weekly card reading this week. All of that is kind of getting pushed into our thinking process. Everything that Uranus has been doing these paradigm shifting cataclysmic changes and rocking our world, sometimes to the point that we don't want it to be rocked. That is also what our minds are now catching up to, but we've had to do it kind of slow and steady because that's Taurus's process. Okay, so Uranus and Mercury are super involved in the Taurus space, and even though they're not right at this new moon, because this new moon is in the second last degree, 28th degree, sun and moon kissing cousins right here at the end of the Taurus sign. Remember that wherever you are in the world will set up your house system. So where you're seeing Taurus on this chart may not be where it is for you. I said it just for my part of the world. But what I'm trying to say here is 6 degrees of Mercury, of Taurus for Mercury is quite far off where the sun and moon are, but because they're all in the same sign, the archetypal energy of Taurus is exceptionally strong right now. So everything is kind of at play, and the sun and moon bring in those lights. They are the lights or the luminaries. They bring that to the end of the Taurus story, the 28th degree of Taurus. It's like they're trying to wrap something up in a bow and shine a light on it and say, this is what we are working on. This is what we've been working on. This is what we're working towards within the Taurus space. So definitely look at where Taurus is in your chart. For example, I know that Taurus for me is in my 9th and 10th house. So that's where I want to focus on what all the Taurian things and all these planets conversations, the changes, the shifts in that space. I'm going to make that more personal by looking at where that is in my chart. So you can do the same if you know how to draw up a chart. I do have a video on that if you don't. And of course, if it's all just way too complicated on your own, remember you can get a reading. So just check the links out at the bottom if you want to get in touch with me. Another thing I really, really do want to mention, which is a huge deal as well, no pun intended, huge is probably a good keyword for Jupiter, but here is Jupiter at 0 degrees. The day before this new moon, Jupiter entered Taurus. Now, Jupiter takes 12 years to do his full 360-degree orbit, so he hasn't been in Taurus for 12 years. I mean, that's a substantial amount of time, right? So anybody who is 12 or turning 12 is going to be having a Jupiter return also for 24, 36, 48, so on. Just go in 12-year increments, or check out your chart and see if Jupiter is in Taurus in your chart. I mean, Jupiter's somewhere in your chart, obviously. And whether it's in Taurus, you know, it'll still, Jupiter moving into Taurus will still impact you. But obviously, if you're having a Jupiter return, that's going to be a really big deal. But Jupiter is a big deal. That's his thing. He's big, he's loud, he's excessive, he's benevolent. He makes a splash wherever he goes. He tends to be more on the lucky side, but also excessive. So sometimes excess is not great. So we have to see where that is. Now, bearing in mind that Taurus is a sign of the 5 senses, we may excessively eat or drink or be merry because that is a very sensory experience. So we will want to watch ourselves for excesses because Jupiter also will spend about a year in Taurus. So he's pretty much here from May this year to May next year. If you have a lot of Taurus stuff in your own chart, that is all going to get a little boost, a little trigger for the good, or sometimes challenging. Either way, we work with that energy and we grow through it. But yes, this is a big deal. Literally, he's moving in here for the first time, and he's going to end up coming into, well, Mercury will get out before Jupiter gets there, but he's going to bump into Uranus on his journey, and that's going to be an even bigger deal. And we'll wait and see what happens when we get there. So the other thing about Jupiter is in this lunation, this new moon, Jupiter at 0 degrees of Taurus is square to Pluto at 0 degrees of Aquarius. They're both fixed signs. So there is a little bit of a power play going on here between where we are fixed in our ideals, our ideas, and our thinking, which Pluto is already coming in to try and transform for us, and where we are fixed in our safe spaces, what we find pleasurable, which is where Taurus is, where Jupiter's coming into Taurus. These two fixed spaces are both getting a big old kick of energy. And in fact, the nodes are there as well. So the north node is with Jupiter, and the south node is in a fixed water where we are diving deep into the internal narrative of our emotional intelligence and depth of understanding. So if we want to just make that even a little bit more interesting, we have Mars at the 29th degree of Cancer, which is right at the end of Cancer, almost going to move into the 0 degree of Leo, which would make the 4th of the 4 fixed signs all kind of activated. So even though Mars hasn't quite moved, he's moving imminently, and so it's still kind of activating and triggering that 0 degree Leo point. So there is a lot of fixity in this, bearing in mind that Taurus is a fixed sign, this is a fixed new moon, and then we've got the beginning points of all of the fixed signs getting quite highlighted. However, the new moon is at the end of this particular fixed sign. And you can see there's nothing at the end right now of Aquarius, there's nothing at the end right now of Scorpio, and there's nothing at the end right now of Leo. So even though the new moon is happening in the later degrees of Taurus, mostly the early degrees of all the fixed signs are pretty triggered for this full moon. And that gives us an opportunity to kind of, it's as if the new moon is, as I said earlier, giving us this perspective on what it can be for us when we've come through the journey of moving through the fixed sign points. Bear in mind, we're always continually on journeys. It's like nothing is ever kind of fully completed. It just comes around again at some point, sometimes sooner, sometimes later. But it's as if the sun and moon are lovingly planting a seed of when we complete where we are resistant to change, how fertile we will be, how much we will be able to grow into our new paradigms, let's say. So feel really positive about that, even though it's kind of coming at a bit of a like pressure buildup, which I'm sure most of us can feel, especially if you have strong fixed energy. And then one other thing that I want to point out before we sign off, okay, that 29th degree of Mars is pretty strong, of course, because anything at the end of a degree is strong. And the 6 degree Saturn is forming a happy conversation, a sextile, which is a good conversation with Mercury. So all we were saying about Mercury just now, he's getting a little bit supported by the disciplinarian that Saturn is, a little bit supported in the, slow yourself down, get your foundation sorted. But equally, because Saturn is in a sign that is Jupiter ruled, and that is Pisces, which is all about the dream, he's also giving a little more leniency to Mercury to dream a new dream, which is what we're trying to do. He's saying, be realistic, slow it down, but dream a new dream, get creative. And I'm sorry, one thing that I really meant to mention at the very beginning and didn't is that because all of this Taurus stuff is ruled by Venus, because Venus is the ruler of Taurus, we also want to look at Venus in the chart. And here she is at 12 degrees of Cancer. She's in the moon sign and the moon is in her sign. They have this mutual reception. So they're like sisters that are in each other's houses and supporting one another, even though they're not kind of in the same room as one another. So actually this very nurturing, because remember Cancer is a very nurturing mothering sign, this very nurturing Venus is in charge right now of Jupiter, the node, the north node only, Mercury and Uranus, as well as Sun and Moon. At this new moon, Venus is in charge of all of them because they're all in her place, in her home. They're all there, and she has a very nurturing thing. You might almost think like she's really stocked the fridge. She pre-cooked for everybody that's in the house, and she left chocolates on the pillows and rose petals, and she wanted to make it feel as loving and homey as possible. So even though there is a lot of intensity in this space, and there is a level of discomfort we might need to deal with, she also wanted to leave some comforting touches because she has a very nurturing energy. So how can you do that for yourself? How can you nurture yourself through the discomfort? How can you give yourself a snuggly blanket even when you have to sit with some difficult feelings? At least you've got that soft blanket to cuddle, or something along those lines to help you to understand how to nurture your senses whilst going through some big changes. Okay, I think we'll stop there. That is the new moon in Taurus. I hope this has been helpful. And in my red tent gathering, we will be focusing on Venus. So for anybody who wants to really understand how to work with your own Venus and understand your own Venus, that's where we'll be moving into with red tent. And look again, link in the bio to get in touch with me if you're interested in joining that monthly practice where we go through different archetypal energies every month, and you learn how to process that for yourself. Your Venus is your Venus in Cancer. Mine is not. Mine is in Gemini. So I have to understand Gemini Venus reflections, but I need to understand Venus first in order to understand the different clothes that Venus may wear. If she were in Gemini, what would she wear? If she were in Cancer, what would she wear? If she were in Leo, what would she wear? And so you understand your own natal Venus before you can understand where she is traveling at the moment, which in this case would be Cancer. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I hope that the sound is okay, and sending you so much love and luck through this next lucky, big Jupiterian energized new moon in Taurus.